The CEO smirked and introduced me as the one who almost ruined the deal. Laughter didn't follow. That was the point. The boardroom stayed still. Glass walls catching the gray of a Chicago morning while the partner studied the table like he was deciding where to cut. The CEO let the silence work, then tilted his head toward me as if I were an object on loan. The words had already done their job. I felt them land where my name used to be. The CFO leaned forward. Irritation sharpened into a smile. They hadn't fired me yet, he said. They wanted the partner to see my face. A warning label. I kept my posture neutral. Hands flat, pulse steady. When the CEO told me to pour water, it wasn't a request. It was theater. I stood and moved around the table. The partner didn't look up. His pen stayed capped. As I set the glass down, I slid a tiny folded marker beneath the coaster small enough to disappear. Precise enough to be found by the only person who would notice. I didn't rush. I didn't apologize. I went back to my seat. My name is Marin Caldwell. I am 38 years old. The sentence formed inside me without ceremony, stitched into the moment like a brace. Years of compliance work had taught me what mattered when rooms turned hostile. Control your body. Track the exits. Watch the hands. The CEO's fingers were laced behind his head. The CFO's knee bounced. The partner finally looked up. They wanted my face attached to failure. Fine. Let it be the last face they see before this collapses. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't smile. He glanced at the documents, then at me, then back at the CEO. Interesting, he said, and let the words sit until it felt heavier than the table. Then he asked if I had personally approved the final risk assessment. The room tightened. No one moved to answer. Someone cleared their throat and stopped. I kept my eyes on the partner, measuring the space between what they were pretending and what the records would show. This story is a work of fiction created by our writing team. I felt the shift before it became visible, the moment when a public joke turns into a private problem, and I understood the game they were playing well enough to know what it would cost me if I stayed quiet. Why were they pretending I had signed something I never approved? I didn't go back to my desk. I logged in from the conference room while they were still deciding whether to keep talking over each other or pretend nothing had happened. The file opened clean. Too clean. My name sat at the bottom of the approval page. Aligned perfectly. Dated correctly. Stamped with final authority. The problem wasn't the placement. It was the trail. The metadata didn't breathe the way mine did. The timing was off. The sequence skipped a step I never skipped. A message popped up in the corner of my screen. You should let this go. It came from the person who had taught me how to read these systems. My closest internal advisor, the one who used to tell me where the bodies were buried and which ones were still warm. I typed back that I needed clarification on the approval chain. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. You're making this worse. The reply came. For yourself. The fear landed late. The betrayal landed first. I didn't delete anything. I didn't correct the signature or flag the report. I adjusted the logic around it. Quiet and precise, the way we were trained to do when regulators might be watching. If the document was accessed from outside the internal range, the values would shift just enough to expose the reach. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic. Just a record that could not be explained away. Another message. Shorter this time? Stop digging. I leaned back and watched the access logs refresh. Someone was already checking whether the ground had moved. What if the evidence against me hadn't been planted by the people who hated me, but by the one person who knew exactly how to make it stick? The door opened without a knock. My advisor stood there, face neutral, hands empty. He glanced at the screen and then at me, like we were sharing a private joke that had gone stale. You don't want this fight, he said, not unkindly. I met his eyes and waited. Silence has a way of demanding more than questions ever do. He exhaled. Sharp. They need a clean file. I saved my changes and closed the system. The room felt smaller, but the path forward didn't. Whatever they thought they had finished, they had just reopened. I pulled the personnel archive the way you pull a thread you already know will come loose. Names first, title second, departure reasons last. The pattern didn't show up until I stopped looking for it. Resigned. Mutual separation. Role eliminated. I opened the first file and found the lawsuit tucked behind the exit memo. Personal liability. Professional negligence. The second file had the same structure. The third didn't bother hiding it. Bank records attached. Settlements that chewed through savings and then kept going. None of them landed somewhere else in the industry. None of them ever testified. I called legal and asked, lightly, whether there was a retention policy for post-employment litigation. The line stayed quiet long enough to register. Then a voice I recognized slid in. Careful. Why are you asking curiosity? That's not a good reason. I ended the call without arguing. Curiosity wasn't the issue. Silence was. Every file told the same story once you read past the labels. No clean exits, no soft landings, just pressure applied until someone cracked and signed. I traced one case deeper than the rest. A compliance lead who flagged a routing anomaly and got sued within weeks. The money trail jumped accounts, crossed borders, came back thinner and quieter. A few transfers brushed against a familiar counterparty. Sterling's firm sat at the edge of it. Close enough to touch, far enough to deny. My phone buzzed. A message from my advisor, stripped down to a single line. Drop it. I stared at the screen and felt the floor tilt. If the people before me hadn't resigned, what if they had been erased? The thought sharpened everything. This wasn't about losing a job. It was about criminal exposure wrapped in paperwork, clean enough to pass an audit if no one pushed back. I pushed back and watched the logs update again. Someone was checking my access. Another message came through. This one from an unfamiliar number. We should talk. Privately, I closed the archive and stood. Whatever was moving had noticed me noticing, and that meant the window was closing. Sterling didn't bother closing the door. He stood just inside it, hands empty, eyes already on me like he'd been in the room longer than I had. I know you didn't sign. He said, I want to know where the original is. No greeting, no context. The words landed flat and deliberate. I didn't answer right away. Silence makes people reveal what they think they're hiding. He took a step closer, scanning the desk, the screen, the outlets. You're careful, he added. That's why this is awkward. I don't keep originals. I replied, I keep trails. A corner of his mouth lifted, not a smile. More like approval with conditions. Yeah, you're not wrong, but trails can be redirected. Originals can't. That was the moment it clicked. He wasn't asking out of concern. He was inventorying damage, measuring how much the fall would cost him and how cheaply he could buy the wreckage afterward. He leaned back against the table. When this company cracks, it will do it fast. Markets hate surprises. Boards panic, prices drop, and you're here to catch the knife. I'm here to make sure it falls where I can reach it. The room felt smaller, not because of him, because of what he was assuming I would do next. You need me documented as the mistake, I said, clean enough to pass scrutiny. His eyes stayed on mine. I need inevitability. The pressure sharpened. He already knew about the forged approval. He already knew legal would move before facts did. He was waiting to see if I would protect myself or protect the fiction. Was he waiting for me to fall or offering me a way out? He straightened, checked his watch. You should decide quickly. Systems close ranks when they smell blood. I don't bleed easily. I said, another almost smile. That's why this will be interesting. He turned for the door, paused. If you move anything, he added, without looking back, make sure it's something that can't be put back. The door stayed open after he left. I didn't close it. I pulled up the access logs instead and watched a new line appear. External and impatient. The calendar invite arrived marked urgent and non-optional. No agenda. Just a time and a list of names that told me how this would end if I let it. The boardroom filled faster than usual. Legal took a seat and didn't look up. IT joined remotely. Camera off. The CEO stood instead of sitting, which meant this wasn't a discussion. It was a decision waiting to be read aloud. We're here to address a breakdown in process, he began. Specifically, conduct that puts the company at risk. I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder where my records lived. The screen stalled. The folder refreshed. Empty. I tried again. A system message blinked once and vanished. Access denied. My phone buzzed onto the table. An internal alert I hadn't seen before. Permissions updated. I raised my head. My files are gone. The CFO didn't blink. Then they weren't compliant. I switched to the audit server. Same result. Legal shifted papers. Careful not to meet my eyes. Someone on the board cleared their throat and said my name like it was a formality they'd already signed. This will be handled as a disciplined termination. The CEO continued. Clean, professional. Based on what? I asked, keeping my voice level. A pause. Not for thought. For alignment. Based on the final report. Legal said at last. The one on record. I looked at the blank screen and felt the weight move. Not toward me. Away from me. The system had closed its doors and left me standing outside with my hands full of air. What if the only safe proof was never digital at all? I shut the laptop and folded my hands on the table. The CEO watched for a reaction that didn't come. The silence stretched until it made him uncomfortable. We'll proceed, he said. Proceed, I echoed, and stood before anyone could stop me. I need 1 minute. He frowned. For what? To confirm something, I replied. If this is finalized, there's no reason to preserve what you just erased. The room shifted. IT unmuted. Then muted again. Legal's pen stopped moving. I walked out without waiting for permission, already reaching for the only proof that they hadn't touched yet. I powered down the company laptop and slid it into my bag like it was already evidence. My phone followed. Work devices go dark fast when you stop asking permission. The printer in my office whirred once and went quiet. I stacked the pages while the ink was still warm. Audit trails, access logs, approval paths that never converged the way they were supposed to. The paper felt heavier than the screen ever did. I tucked the stack into a plain folder and sealed it with a clip I'd kept for years without knowing why. A knock hit the doorframe. Not a request. The advisor leaned in, eyes scanning the desk for a glow that wasn't there. You're making this worse, he said, softer than before. Only if it stays quiet, I replied, and turned the desk drawer so he could see the recorder. Analog, red light off. The implication landed before the explanation ever would. His jaw tightened. That won't save you. It doesn't need to. I said, it needs to be boring. He stepped back. The space between us widened. And with it, the certainty that he couldn't touch what he couldn't trace. I opened a secure channel on my personal device and confirmed the last setting. If my access was revoked, if my badge stopped working, if my termination processed, a package would leave on its own. Not dramatic, just thorough. The destination didn't need an introduction. Who would panic first once they realized I wasn't afraid? My phone vibrated. A message from legal, short and clean. Please return to the boardroom. I didn't answer. I packed the folder and stood. The hall outside my office felt different when I stepped into it, less like a corridor, more like a funnel. People looked up and then looked away. Someone tried to smile and missed. The elevator doors closed and opened again on my floor. I walked past the boardroom and kept going. If they wanted me present, they could come find me. I pressed send on one last confirmation and felt the line go live. Behind me, voices rose, then cut off. The system had noticed the change. I didn't wait for permission or a reply. I drafted the message while the hallway noise behind my office thickened into something frantic and unfocused. No greetings, no explanations. Just a file and a short note. The attachment wasn't about my company. It was about a clean scenario built from public filings and timing he couldn't dispute. If the deal went through as structured, the tax exposure would surface within a single reporting cycle. Deferred liabilities turning visible. Questions he wouldn't be able to outrun. I didn't frame it as a threat. I framed it as math. I read it once and sent it before doubt could ask for edits. The response came faster than I expected. You're crossing a line. I didn't apologize. You already crossed it. I'm just showing you where it ends. A pause long enough to feel intentional. Then a second message. Shorter. You're assuming I didn't know. I'm assuming you didn't calculate the timing. I typed back. or the way your signature aligns with the exposure. The typing indicator flickered, stopped, flickered again. I watched it like a pulse. If saving him from this bought me leverage, what did insurance cost? The reply landed without preamble. You're not an employee, you're insurance. The words changed the air. Not relief, not safety, alignment. He wasn't offering protection. He was acknowledging value, the kind that doesn't sit on payroll. Another message followed. Sharper. The board will try to move quickly. They'll want a clean ending. I don't do clean endings, I wrote. I do contained ones. Silence. Then a final line. Be available. I locked my phone and slid it face down. Outside. Someone knocked and didn't wait. The advisor's voice cut through the door. Brittle now. They're asking for you. I stood and straightened the folder under my arm. If Sterling was repositioning, the board would feel it before they understood it. I opened the door and stepped into the noise, already measuring how fast the pressure would shift once the hunter realized he was part of the collateral. The CEO stood before anyone else could claim the floor. Papers aligned, voice measured, the posture of someone who believed the outcome had already been approved. We're concluding this, he began, eyes cutting toward me. Effective immediately, Sterling raised a finger. Not high, just enough. I'll sign, he said. On one condition. The room stalled. Even the air seemed to wait. The CEO recovered first. Of course. We're open to reasonable terms. Sterling didn't look at him. His gaze stayed on me. Marin Caldwell will oversee all funds tied to this deal. Full visibility, final authority. A chair scraped. Someone whispered a name and stopped. Equal authority. Sterling added. To the chief executive. Silence hardened. The CEO's smile thinned into something brittle. Legal shifted. Pages turning without turning. I felt the weight settle where it had never been allowed to sit before. The CEO tried to laugh it off. That's not standard. Neither is forging approvals. Sterling replied, calm and precise. Standards are flexible when risk is real. Every face turned to me. Expectation sharpened into demand. The offer sat there, clean and public. Power wrapped in legitimacy. The kind that comes with applause later and knives earlier. What would you do if power was handed to you publicly? I stood. No, I said. The word landed heavier than any contract. The CEO blinked. You're refusing oversight. I'm refusing the role. I corrected. I won't stabilize something you intend to keep broken. Sterling studied me. Not surprised. Name your terms. I don't want authority here, I replied. I want distance. A murmur broke loose. The CEO stepped forward. Anger slipping through. You don't get to dictate, Sterling. Cut him off again. She does. Or I walk. The CEO froze. The board stared at the table like it might explain this away. I felt the balance tip. Not toward me, but away from them. I'm done being the fix. I said, find another one. Sterling nodded once. Approval without attachment. He closed his folder and stood. Then we proceed differently. I gathered my things and turned for the door. Behind me, voices collided, sharp and panicked. Ahead of me, the hallway waited. And whatever came next was already moving. I didn't wait for them to call me back in. I walked to my office, pulled the envelope from the bottom drawer, and headed for legal. The CEO caught up at the doorway. His smile had dropped the pretense. This doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't, I replied, and handed the envelope across the table. It's already done. He opened it, scanning faster than he meant to. The date at the top landed hard. 2 days earlier. His jaw tightened. You planned this. I prepared for it. Legal looked from the page to me. You're resigning effective immediately. Yes. The CEO leaned in. You think this protects you? I think it keeps me clean. A pause stretched. The advisor stood in the corner, hands folded, watching the floor like it might offer instructions. Legal cleared her throat. There are reporting obligations. Already met? I said, the evidence was submitted through an encrypted channel. The CEO's eyes flicked up. To whom? Appropriately. His breath hitched. The room shifted again. Smaller this time? He straightened. Trying to find leverage that wasn't there. You're bluffing. I slid my phone across the table and unlocked it. A single confirmation sat on the screen. No details, no signatures, just time-stamped acknowledgement. Sterling secured the channel. I added. And watch that name do its work. The CEO's face went still, then pale. The advisor's head snapped up. You involved him. The CEO said, quieter now. He involved himself. What if leaving was the real victory? Legal gathered the papers. Careful again. We'll need your badge. I placed it on the table. The sound was small but final. The CEO looked at it like it might explode. This started days ago, he said, more to himself than to me. It started when you needed someone to take the fall. I replied, and stood before he could recover. I just stopped standing underneath. As I turned for the door, my phone vibrated once. A short message. Be ready. I didn't answer. I walked out into the hall and kept moving, knowing the noise would catch up soon enough. The cafe was louder than the boardroom had ever been. Cups clinked. A barista called out names. Someone laughed too hard at a corner table. I sat near the window with my phone face up, hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't touched. The notification didn't arrive gently. Breaking news: federal investigators had opened a formal inquiry. The company's name was there, spelled correctly. The CEO's title followed it. Then the words under investigation. No adjectives. No speculation. Just fact. I exhaled. Not relief. Something closer to release. A man at the next table glanced at my screen and then looked away. Polite enough not to stare. No one knew what that headline had cost, or what it had spared. That was fine. Winning didn't need witnesses. My phone buzzed again. Sterling this time. One line. Clean separation. You did what you needed to do. I didn't reply. I didn't owe him closure. I took a sip of coffee and felt my shoulders drop for the first time in days. They introduced me as the one who almost ruined the deal. They were wrong. I was the one who ended it. The lesson came without drama, the way real lessons usually do. If you stay quiet in a system that needs someone to take the blame, you won't be rewarded for loyalty. You'll be chosen for sacrifice. Boundaries aren't attitudes, they're actions, and they matter most when power is trying to buy your silence. I paid the check and stood outside. The city kept moving, indifferent and solid. That felt right. I walked until the noise softened and the day caught up with me. If you stayed with me through this, thank you. I know stories like this can hit close to home. If you've been in a room where the truth was inconvenient, I'd like to hear how you handled it. Share your thoughts below if you want. And if you're interested in more stories about holding your ground when it counts, feel free to stick around. I'll be here doing the same.